You're now listening to Resilience with Ruti Shah, a podcast which brings you incredible stories of resilience, unfiltered, inspiring, and real. Stay tuned for today's guest.
Hello, listeners. Welcome back. Today, I have Paul Meinshausen with me, a data scientist, serial entrepreneur, and co-founder of AI-powered startup transforming consumer tech. His journey started in US Army intelligence, designing AI models for complex data. He later transitioned into leadership roles at Housing.com and Teradata before co-founding PaySense, a fintech startup that scaled rapidly and was acquired for $185 million. Beyond building startups, Paul is also an early investor in cutting-edge AI companies like Superbase and Bifrost.ai. With a career built on innovation, resilience, and a deep understanding of AI, he continues to push the boundaries of what's possible in tech and startups. So, how did he navigate the startup world and shape the AI landscape? Let's dive into the conversation and explore his journey.
Hey, Paul, welcome to the podcast. It is such a pleasure to have you here. How have you been?
I've been well. I've been had a very nice morning. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. It's a pleasure. So, Paul, why don't we get started by understanding your journey a little bit as an entrepreneur?
Okay. Yeah, it's I guess, you know what I have to say, I have a hard time differentiating my journey as an entrepreneur from my journey as a data scientist, a journey as a person, journey as a, husband, father, everything else. I don't almost. Actually, I think it took me a long time before I even began to think of myself as an entrepreneur. It was not really the starting position. Where I'm from the US, grew up on the East Coast. I came from a military family, so not a strong sense of rootedness anywhere. And then always had an inclination to explore the world and understand all the different places and peoples and everything else about, I guess, kind of the diversity of human life in the world. And I think that's always shaped my path in life. But I then found my way into data science, especially in consumer technology, and then increasingly in early stage technology and startups.
Mm-hmm.
And I also found my way to Singapore in 2013, and then moved a year later to India, really less than a year later to India. And then that's where I worked with a big startup there. Then I co-founded a consumer startup there. And then that kind of was successful in many ways, was acquired in 2019. I moved back to Singapore, and then I found myself starting another company. But
Right.
as a way of understanding the world, and as a way of trying to make a contribution to how we live as people, and being an entrepreneur is a byproduct of that. It's not the actual goal for me. That was just the best way for me to interact with the world in the way I wanted. Not the end point.
Yeah. So I've heard this before, right? Where people say that entrepreneurship essentially is a journey in itself. And a lot of people embark on that journey as a way to find themselves. I'm hearing you say that, for you, it's a way of connecting with people. And maybe there is a desire to make an impact in a different way, given the kind of experiences that you've had.
Yeah, it's less about, for me, although actually, I will say the ability to be very curated and intentful about who you work with is an advantage and also a challenge of early stage startup, kind of being a founder, being an entrepreneur. And that's obviously very important to me. But when I say interacting with people, it's less about like my concrete interactions, and it's actually more that I think more broadly about how we exist as humans in 2023 and in this decade, and how we interact with technology. And I think that there are ways to improve those processes, and being an entrepreneur is the best way I see to actually make that contribution, which obviously manifests in my own personal life, but that's not the point. It's not like I'm trying to. I think there's many ways I could enjoy and interact with people. I mean, for example, I've also angel invested in many companies, right? And I get to interact with a lot of people that way, but that's not the central way that I can have an effect that I want to have in the world.
Correct.
So yeah, it's more about building what I wanted to build, because of what I think it will do. That was what was important for me.
I hear you. So I think for you, and correct me if I'm wrong, entrepreneurship is a means to the end. It's not the end goal in itself, right? I think the bigger vision that you have is to contribute in a way where we can interact better with technology, with each other. And I think in this vastly globally connected world, how is it that you can leave a mark in a way?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's right. It's in a sense, I think there's ways that we can interact better with technology, and technology can interact better with us. But the only way to make that happen is really to build it and get people to adopt it and use it, and then create that space, right? Research isn't going to do it. Taking on somebody else's priorities in their business is not going to do it. So I have to do it myself, ourselves. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's such a spirit of entrepreneurship, right? I'm going to roll up my sleeves. I'm going to jump into it right away and see what I can make of the chaos that surrounds us. There is so much chatter in terms of, especially when we think about tech. And now, of course, tech overall, when we were thinking about tech a decade ago, we were saying software and hardware and all of that. Today, there's a very clear segmentation around artificial intelligence as well. And I think the startup that you have in Singapore, AMP, is about marketing technology. Is that right?
In a very narrow business sense, yes. But no, the fundamental thing is much deeper than that. It's really more about consumer mobile tech. It's basically just the fact that this device that sort of sits in our pockets, that we interact with in the world, is a super important way for technology to influence and to support our decisions as humans in very complex dynamics. And the way this device learns about us and adapts to our experiences of the world has to do with how the internals of the software of it are designed, and then how people who influence its the way it operates, how they interact with it. And so those often tend to be marketers. But I think of marketing as just like, that's again a derivative fact. It's really the fact of the application itself. I think a great example is I grew up in the days when if you wanted to go somewhere, if you wanted to find your way in the physical world, you needed a navigation, you needed instruction, right? And I remember when I was very young, and we would travel places outside of our normal pathways, that the way my father would do it was he would, unroll the map on the dashboard of our vehicle and the path to where we were going. And that map told him certain things about the world that he would follow. And then when I got a little bit older, but still in the back seat, right, we started to use this, things like MapQuest. And what that meant was, instead of using a map we maybe picked up at a gas station 4 years ago that would tell you any possible way to get everywhere, and you would draw it and trace it and find out what your route was, then we would go onto the site, maybe MapQuest, and we would put in our destination and put in our starting position, and it would give us step-by-step instructions. And I remember that was like, whoa, that was like all of a sudden you didn't have to debate about the best route. That told you the best route. And it was very clear and very explicit. And you could even print out the step-by-step, get off on this highway, get off on that highway. The interesting thing was, of course, even though now it was like latest, greatest instructions, you'd print those out and you'd get into the car and it turns out, that road is under construction, or there's traffic,
Yeah.
or something else happens, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so still the map wasn't really a very high-grained, granular representation of the world. And so you would have to navigate really by yourself on the back of those instructions, but it's amazing.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden smartphones came such that you had applications on the phone, and then Google Maps and other map software came such that you could do it on the phone, except now because of data, we could update the instructions in more real time.
Yep.
And so now think about how we interact with maps. Now maps don't just tell us how to get to a destination, they actually help us choose our destination.
Correct.
I went to a cafe this morning that I picked off of Google Maps because it fit the parameters of my preferences at the moment, right? So
correct.
This is an amazing process, but ultimately, if we want phones to get even better in terms of being able to support us and support our decisions, we need them to actually start to be able to not just learn about the world, but learn about us as people in the world, so that they can help us navigate the complexity and the abundance of information and opportunities for us to spend our time and attention. And so that's what we're building, is like some part of the infrastructure and the artificial intelligence that would let that phone start, and the application on the phone begin to learn about us at a specific individual level and update its model, so that, as you can think of like you're the best personal assistant you could ever have in terms of a human.
Yeah.
And how they help you, and how could we have software do something almost as good or in some ways better?
Absolutely. So it's about making technology work for you in that sense, and just going from there. So, you've been an angel investor, you mentioned that, and of course you've been an entrepreneur more than once, and that's not the first startup that you've had, as you mentioned as well. So what are some of the challenges, Paul, that you would have faced along the way in this journey that you've had?
Well, in a sense, building a company is closer to that experience that my father used way back in the days to navigate, right? Like, you basically have a map of the world that kind of represents how the world is laid out and what it looks like. And what you have to do is kind of build a path in the approximate direction that you're going. And then convince a lot of other people that that path is a good one. But then also, as you drive, update your path, and maybe even update your destination. And that takes a degree of belief and optimism and patience that are just not really natural phenomena, I think, in terms of like the easiest path success as human beings, in terms of putting food in your mouth and a roof over your head, and kind of like minimizing labor, for example, which I think is a deep internal drive, right? Like, minimize labor, maximize happiness, right? Like that loop. A lot of things about building a company breaks that loop, and those are hard to deal with in very concrete ways. Just, why am I doing this? And wow, nobody believes it. Why should I continue to believe it? And how do I help them begin to believe it? And these are just all very hard things.
And these are, of course, some of the challenges that we see throughout, right? In order to say that, okay, I have a particular vision. And I love the analogy that you drew here in terms of the map, because there are going to be certain roads which are closed, certain which are under construction. You may have to come to them later. And there could be ways where you really have to make a U-turn, come back to square one and say, okay, where now? What next, right? And I think having that very clear belief system, having a very clear vision of what you're trying to do, in that sense, I think is super important, because otherwise, how are you going to get started in the first place? I know of people who have an idea, but they get paralyzed just thinking about, what could go wrong, instead of saying that, okay, these are the things that could go right. So because I know that, you have been a part of the US Department of Defense as well. And then, you've been a data scientist, so you've been supporting that, and then an entrepreneur. So at what point did you figure out that, okay, this is really the path that I want to take. And come what may, I'm going to remain optimistic. I'm going to persevere, and I'm going to have the patience in order to continue along this path. Well, was that a moment, or was it again something that you developed over a period of time?
So I used an analogy, and in many ways that analogy is a good one, but in many ways that analogy is incredibly misleading. Because it assumes, like when you're going on vacation and you're using the map to find your way, you know that you're going to Florida. That was like often the destination for us when I was a child, is like that was where the best beach was for us in driving distance, and where my grandparents were located, et cetera. So like you have those that's clear, right? I think for so many things in life, that's not clear. And it's not necessary. And so actually, I find in many cases, one of the first things you're told you need to do from a very young age is come up with a plan.
Yeah.
And then follow that plan. And I'm pretty dogmatically opposed to that. And it manifests in a lot of ways. Like, I think product, when you're building product, a lot of times you learn as a product manager, come up with a plan, lay out your goals, have your roadmap. And I think in a lot of times those tools are counterproductive. I'm influenced by a lot of ways of thinking, in terms of being very present, being very, very oriented towards your context in a given space and time, and then making the next best decision in that place and time. And I say this a bit strongly against the plan. There'll always be a sense of the direction and the goal. Like that happens pretty normal, because as humans, actually, one of the things we're just really good without any training, we're good at daydreaming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Children like daydream. My 4-year-old is like amazing at just thinking of crazy scenarios, of being a pirate and looking for hidden treasure, right? Like we just do it. And what our brain is really doing is just simulating the world and then just following that simulation. I actually think that just going to happen, right? But what you need to be able to do is also just be kind of like focused on, well, let's set aside that destination. I still need to do something today. And what is that thing I do today? Yeah. And then how do I, at the end of the day, learn something from what I did and reflect on what I learned yesterday? And then, maybe project that forward to tomorrow, but really contract your field of view and live in that space and not be so oriented actually towards that 5-year plan or that big goal for your company. And I think that big goal and that 5-year event, that's often what drowns us in like fear, because we're afraid of not realizing that big thing. Whereas actually there's so many other big things that we could end up doing, and in retrospect, we'd totally be fine with it. Yeah. But we don't do any of it because we're just drowned in fear. So a big part of my regular practice is training myself to step back from that natural simulation of planning and of thinking big and of going and chasing that thing. And so a lot of my, day-to-day tactics and the things that keep me going are things that keep me just like pulled in and really thinking just about the challenge of today or even this afternoon.
Yeah. So one day at a time sometimes, right? And Always, yes. Yeah. And it's interesting what you said, because as you were talking about your kid, your 4-year-old, I was thinking about my daughter when she was around 5 and 6, and she was really into Lego blocks, right? And she would, pour everything on the floor, all the blocks, and then she would start building. And I asked her, what are you building? And she's like, I don't know. And she'll continue building, right? And at the end of it, she would have created a structure that works for her, that brings her the joy, and that's her definition of I'm done.
Yeah,
that's right. Rather than looking at the booklet, which tells you step by step what you need to do. And I think a lot of us get lost in that booklet, and our creativity, the innovation that we have within us, gets stifled as a result of that. And what we end up doing is following the manual, whereas what we should be doing is listening to ourselves, and as you rightly said, one day at a time, stay engaged, stay present, and keep facing the challenges as they come, and you will realize you built something which is so beautiful and so unique in its way, right? um, yeah.
Yeah. And it's hard because our own fear causes us to be like, maybe we'll build something useless or something, which is why I think a lot of times we actually end up asking our children exactly those kind of questions. What are you building? Like, you better have a plan, like build something real, right? Like, and that's
so
why,
true.
and Legos knows that, which is why Legos doesn't sell blocks, it sells kits, because it knows that most people have had the creativity trained out of them, and what they want is the X fighter from Star Wars, or the whatever vehicle from Paw Patrol, or anything.
Yes.
Right? Like the kit, the final destiny, the clear kind of, here's what you're supposed to be building. And it's very hard to sustain an openness to like, no, create something different, or just kind of go as you go. And again, it doesn't mean that you should never not have a nice, kit, like that's okay. Of course, right. It's just that it becomes so much the default, and like the expectation that we live our whole lives that way. We're just constantly building somebody else's kit.
Yeah. Oh, totally agree. In fact, this is something where I've written in the book as well, that, when you look at the rear view mirror as you're driving, which version of yourself are you looking at? Is it a version that the society wanted you to become, or is it someone that you see who's with you and that's truly you, right? So as you said, sometimes you need to step back as you do and see where you're at. Is this really something that you have chosen for yourself? Or like Lego, and I love the company, but still saying it out, like Lego, they've given you how you need to become creative rather than just letting you be, right? In that sense.
The rearview mirror is such a good analogy. And so I met my wife when we both were in grad school. We both had a fellowship in the US called the Fulbright, which basically kind of funds you to go do research in another particular country. So we met as Fulbright fellows of the same year in Turkey. And we often used to joke in the early days, because we both had won a lot of, like, we'd gone to the, like, we're very successful at applying for lots of scholarships and getting them and everything else. And there's this particular thing, especially that you learn as you grow into adulthood and through adolescence and then through university and stuff, a particular form of success. And a big part of it is this essay, which is how you present yourself, right? It's your scholarship essay, it's your fellowship essay, it's your proposal. And they always ask questions like, what do you want to do, or what do you want to achieve, or what do you want to, and you're supposed to tell a story in your essay. You're basically telling your story. And we used to be like, well, I don't really know. I don't care. I just want to go to Turkey and like learn stuff. But you learn that what people wanted to hear was this very intentful story that there's like this through line through your life. And, when I was 5, I saw this thing that inspired me. And now, then I made a decision when I was 12 and 15 and 18 and 24. And now here I am, and see why it's so obvious that you should give me this fellowship, because I was always intended to do this thing. But what you knew that what you had done was learn to tell that story. Because that's what was rewarded, and that was what was meaningful, and that's what people needed to hear. And it's a skill set that's pretty amazing, but it was a story. And but the danger is when you start to believe that story, that at every step you were intending for that to happen. And then that somehow that was predictive of success, such that you weren't able at each of those steps to actually be open to learning something new and following a new path and being opportunistic. And we're really afraid of that character of a dilettante, or somebody who's just, willy-nilly kind of following their carefree way and never doing anything with purpose. And that's such an iconic figure that you learn to like not be. Be purposeless, or go wherever the wind takes you. And again, I think there's something to that as well. But somehow if you can navigate those two extremes and do that, but also learn what your preferences are and then follow them. That's what it's all about.
And I can hear a lot about this sense of letting yourself be be a little bit more free rather than restricting yourself and not operating from a place of fear. And that fear could be the fear of failure, the fear of unknown. And I mean, it's real for a lot of us, right? Where we are responsible for financially supporting our family. And that's where that fear naturally stems from. But there are ways to mitigate that too, as to how do you remain financially viable and not, sell everything that you have in order to have your startup. I mean, that would be foolish, but, figuring out for yourself what really works, what that balance looks like.
I don't think it's any different for anybody, actually. In fact, that's one of the things that I've always, when you asked me the question earlier about the entrepreneur, I'll tell you something is like when I was earlier, and I originally thought I would be more, do research and stay in academia and stay in the university setting, right? And then, but as I kind of migrated and entered this world, one of the things that I rejected, in a sense, or was wary of, was that like there's this sense of essentialness or like what is the entrepreneur journey or something. And then I seen so much content and so many stories being told specifically about founders and entrepreneurs. And because of its status in society and movies and how we are globally, India, US, it's the same thing. Although, I still remember early days in my early days in India where, people would constantly talk about the challenge of being an entrepreneur because it wasn't perceived as something real, et cetera. Right. So like there's that for sure, but there's enough cultural cachet. But what I always found is that actually there was nothing specific about that content that was specific to being an entrepreneur. And there's no less of a journey and no less of an adventure being taken, to like join a big corporation or, or go do a fellowship or like move to a new country and do a job. They're like, all of them have the same dynamics and take the same bravery and the same, can hold the same thrill and sense of adventure. There's nothing like inherently uniquely wonderful or special about entrepreneurship as such. And so I often try to like shy away from letting it be encapsulated and held so that it's sort of like you either have to aspire to be an entrepreneur or just look on and like justify why you decided not to make that path. And I'm like, actually, you don't have to justify that at all. It's like there's nothing like in whatever role you have in the world today, there's specialness and adventure and like meaning and all those things, which it doesn't even really need to be said. I'm not even trying to be saying it. It's just, so yeah. And that's why I often like think of myself as much more than an entrepreneur. Like in many ways, I'm playing a different role, which is more related, which is generally relatable. And I think the role of an entrepreneur is also just relatable because the building blocks of, taking those Legos is the same, whether you're inside a company or not, or anything else.
Absolutely. And whatever role you're in, you can always be entrepreneurial about it, right? I mean, we all have it in us to be innovative, to be creative, to be bold, to be asking questions, questioning the status quo. That's essentially what an entrepreneur does. And as a leader, we do the same thing day in, day out. So yes, essentially, when it comes to the traits of an entrepreneur, they're not as different as it could be for a leader. It's just that sometimes the stakes are much higher because there is no soft landing. If you're not doing very well in a corporate, you will be told about it next year into your performance review. In 2024, you'll come to realize you're not doing very well. If the company is really nice, they give you a mentor, a coach, and you have those opportunities to continue earning and at the same time becoming a better version of yourself. And then if you're still not, really tightening those loose ends, then you'll be put into PIP, which will give you enough of an opportunity to look for another job. But what I'm trying to say is that, as an entrepreneur, if your startup doesn't do very well, and again, I'm purely talking from a financial standpoint than anything else, right? Because this is so real for a lot of people. The plan B could be activated, a plan C could be activated, and you keep facing the challenges as they're coming. If nothing goes as per the plan, and it's just such a, it's a nosedive for a lot of them. And we keep seeing this where so many startups have failed for whatever reason, right? But they do fail, and that's the reality. And then either you start something else, or you go back to the corporate world where there is a kind of a security, financially speaking, that will keep the income coming. I mean, again, there are various stories around this, which I've read, heard, and it's tough. It's not as easy. And hence, when I was thinking about the concept of resilience in an entrepreneur, there were certain things that really stood out in the research that I'd done, right? In terms of creating that support system, or leveraging the network that you have, or talking about purpose, talking about remaining optimistic, or leveraging your positivity as well in that sense. Paul, do you have any success mantra that you go by?
Success mantra. I think I have success practices. I will put it that way. I encapsulated less in words and more of ways of being. So I'm a big believer in like really hard physical exertion. I think one of the most important things you can do is just absolutely exhaust yourself physically on a regular basis. And you can do that in many ways, so many ways to do it. In my particular case, I run and I also lift weights. It's kind of funny because I spent most of my life not doing those things. I mean, I was very active as a teenager, played soccer and all those things, but didn't really apply myself to it. And then it's funny, I wasn't like I'm super fit and all those things. In fact, I was more of a bookish, kind of like interested in the world and kind of awkward physically and everything else. But then later on, I realized that for me to mentally perform in the way I needed to, and to sustain curiosity and effort cognitively, I had to regularly just physically exhaust myself. And if I don't push to the point of physical exhaustion 2 or 3 times in a week, I just feel myself mentally degrading extremely fast, mentally and emotionally.
Wow.
And I think a lot of times people don't understand that dimension of like ourselves as physical, biological beings, and how important it is to go through this stress and recovery process regularly. Because it's just so easy to just be, like, I'm a developer. I sit on my laptop. Like, why do I need to? I'm not like a buff bro. But no, the problem is our brain is located in a biological body, and like that biological body has to go through things, and our cognition is very much related to those things. And if we don't take that bigger picture into consideration, you can still make decisions, you can still live, right? But when you're talking about like performance level, like the way you perform if you're a professional chess player or tennis player or an athlete, similarly in the world of business or building, if you want to perform at that level, you have to be physically engaged with that process. It is not a purely mental process, my belief, in a physical experience. So that's one. The other one is like I'm incredibly oriented towards sleep. Not just at night, actually, but I kind of went through a process of training myself to take exactly 15-minute naps. And I'll actually go into those naps thinking them dualistically as a meditation or a nap. In other words, a lot of times one of the people, I often hear people say things like, I can't nap. I don't know how. Brain's too busy in the afternoon and stuff like that. I can't do it. And one of the things is that a lot of times you can't because you've never done it before, and you are busy and your head's full, etc. Right. And then what happens is that you hear people say it's important, so you try to do it, and then you get frustrated. You lay down and you get frustrated, right? And so when you go to try it again, what you remember is the frustration. So the trick I found to get around that was I said, I'm not lying down to nap, I'm lying down to meditate. So I lie down to meditate, but I do like reclining. Very important that I'm like physically flat and almost like have structure. Like I don't just lie down any which way and toss and turn. No, I maintain form the same way if you were like meditating. And then I do that. And then what happens is one of two things. One is that in the effort to meditate, oftentimes you'll find you will fall asleep.
You fall asleep.
So it's a byproduct. And if I don't, then I meditate and then like that's success.
Yeah.
So after those 15 minutes with a timer so that it's always the same, I'm successful if I meditate, and if I fall asleep and then wake up with the timer, it's also success. And now I found it to be more of a sleep now. So now my body is trained. I will actually fall asleep within about 2 minutes and usually wake up about 1 to 2 minutes before the timer goes. Because I've just done it so many times, it's just become very automatic.
Yeah, it's a habit.
The value I get from that 15 minutes in the middle of a hard day, it was like, because your brain degrades making decisions across the course of the day. So you start in the morning and by 3 or 4, so you might try and supplement, you drink coffee or something.
Coffee.
So you do something, right? Or you're done, right? For me, when I take that nap, it just gives me another level of like, okay. And it doesn't even have to mean I'm working. Like even if I'm spending time with my 2 children or my wife or something, I still have more energy to be there and present, like, and have a better experience with that. So that's like, these are there's theory and philosophy behind them, right? But they're more, the important thing is the practice of doing the thing, physically exhausting yourself or taking the nap. And those have been so important for me to kind of just navigate, to sustain through hard times, to stay patient, to not get too excited in great times. A lot of times that's a thing people don't look out for.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a habit that I started forming as well, napping. And it has been phenomenal. Like my dad always used to tell me, you don't know how to relax. And I taught myself how to relax, and I can totally resonate with everything that you just said about it. It was difficult to begin with. I'm like, what the heck am I doing with myself? I could be doing something better. Then I was like, listen, it's just 15. I do 20 minutes. I'm like, it's just 20 minutes of the day. What gives? Give it a shot. Give it a shot. So, and that's how I started doing it. And I think it has amazing impact on the second half of the day, because usually I'm done by 3 myself. By 3, my brain just stops working. I'm like, that's it. I cannot make any good decisions after 3, 4 p.m. tops. But yeah, a nap, and you feel very different right after that. Great. Paul, thank you so much. It's been a brilliant conversation. I've enjoyed every bit of it. And I hope to bring you up on soon again on this podcast. Thank you. Thank you for sharing everything that you did.
Thank you. It's been very nice to speak with you.
Yep. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, another fantastic conversation, this time with Paul. And listeners, I don't know if you would agree with me, but I love when he said that you don't need to have everything figured out from the start. It's okay to learn along the way, as long as your vision stays clear, as long as you're clear of that why, the purpose, the North Star as well. In fact, he challenges the idea of rigid planning, encouraging entrepreneurs to be purposeless at times and let the journey unfold. I think there's a beauty in that. Let's bring in my producer, Ravina, to share her thoughts. Ravina, what did you think of the conversation?
Great conversation, Dhruti, and I quite agree with you there. For me, as I was listening, to me, his map analogy truly resonated. As you very well know, entrepreneurship isn't a straight road, right?
Yeah.
It's a path full of unexpected turns, dead ends, and shortcuts. But every detour becomes part of the journey, part of the experience. And that kind of shapes the journey in ways that we can't always predict.
That is so true. Especially if, we are based out of Bangalore. So if people know Bangalore, they would know that, when you're going, Google Maps will show you something else, but the road is closed. What do you do?
Yeah.
So I think you just naturally develop this ability to pivot, to stay agile, and to remain open to experiences, right? And I think, while we are working our mind in order to do this, what he said about physical exertion as a success mantra is really important as well, and I don't think we talk about it enough. In fact, when I was writing my book, there was a lot of sports analogy that I've drawn, because I think you build your mental resilience when you stretch yourself physically as well, right? So it's not just about fitness, it's about keeping your mind sharp and your cognitive abilities at their best. And that's what this is about. So Paul, once again, thank you very much for sharing with us everything that you did. And listeners, I will see you again with another episode of Resilience with Rutisha. Bye-bye.